Okay, let's start our session. Good afternoon. Welcome to the very first schedule of KpqC workshop. I'm Sungmin Kim from Seongsin Women's University, and thank you for attending our session. So this session would be proceeded with online presentation. It is great honor to introduce our speaker, Ms. Deirdre Connolly. She is a senior staff standardization research engineer in Sandbox AQ. Before she joining Sandbox AQ, she was an engineer in Zcash, Brightcove, and Akamai. So today, she will be talking about recent trends and opportunities of hybrid quantum resistance cryptography. So please give a big round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, I'm Deirdre. As my announcer mentioned, I do cryptography, and especially the past few years have been focusing on migrating deployed protocols, especially open port protocols in the IETF, to a quantum resilient posture, or at least making those designs available. So when we're looking to move our cryptography into a quantum resilient future, we have three big buckets. We have generally key establishment stuff, which I'll be talking about today. We have authentication via signatures, and a big bucket of fancy crypto. But today I'm mostly focusing on key establishment. This is where a lot of the activity is happening around the world in trying to mitigate a live attack scenario for the traffic, for the messages that we're trying to protect via encryption. Especially encryption, where you agree on a shared secret over an open channel. And those things are generally rely on cryptographic assumptions and mathematical assumptions that we don't think are secure anymore when we have a large cryptographically relevant quantum computer in the hands of our possible adversaries. So that's pretty much the big reason why we're talking about this sort of stuff, is because we have a ton of cryptography deployed in the real world that depends on the security of Diffie-Hellman. And we no longer have that assumption of Diffie-Hellman being strong either by elliptic curve cryptography or even finite field cryptography, and especially factoring numbers like in RSA. We do not have the assumption anymore that that is a secure thing to build cryptography on or secure our communications or storage with, because Shor's algorithm is a theoretically strong, efficient attack against these schemes when we have a sufficiently large quantum computer to execute it. So not these Diffies and Hellmans, this Diffie and Hellman. We build this into so many of our protocols that we use today, and we now have to find a different way to establish a shared secret based on public parameters and a little bit of secret data that we keep secret to ourselves, to agree on a shared secret with somebody else who we've not exchanged information with before over a public channel. So in the post-quantum realm, it looks like the best thing that we've got in our toolbox are KEMs, which are key encapsulation mechanisms. And I see in the program we have a lot of discussion about the newly adopted candidates for the KpqC competition, which is really cool to see. So for anyone unfamiliar, a key encapsulation mechanism is a triplet of algorithms for a secure crypto scheme. We have key generation that produces a secret decapsulation key and a public encapsulation key. With the encapsulation key, you can run the encapsulation algorithm, and that will spit out a ciphertext, and it'll spit out the shared secret. And usually you hand that ciphertext and that decapsulation key to the decapsulation algorithm, and it will also spit out the same shared secret. And so now you and your other party can start using that shared secret to derive session encryption keys or other keys for other use cases based on a shared secret value that's considered hard to break because of different cryptographic assumptions based on things like lattices or other assumptions that are considered resilient to an attacker with a large quantum computer that can run things like Shor's algorithm. So when we talk about KEMs being secure, we are talking about KEMs that are secure against an indistinguishable chosen ciphertext attack. This is similar to the in CCA2 game that is relevant in public key encryption schemes, but for KEMs, because of reasons, it's generally just in CCA. And this is kind of the scenario where we have an adversary that's able to throw whatever ciphertext it wants at a decapsulation oracle and try to distinguish between what is getting spat out from the decapsulation as a shared secret and whether they can distinguish whether that's the real shared secret or random. And this is the thing that almost all of the KEMs that are being standardized, worked on, and developed either in a purely post-quantum way, in a classical way. I wish I had time to talk about some of the classical KEMs, but I just did not have time to fit it in. And if we want to do it in a hybrid post-quantum traditional way, in CCA is the security standard of, is this a cryptographically secure KEM? So about 2 years ago, in the United States, NIST didn't conclude, but came to a significant milestone of its post-quantum cryptography competition by picking the first KEM that was previously called Kyber and eventually became standardized as the document FIPS 203 and called MLKEM, but I'll get into the differences between them in a second. And then a couple of weeks ago, they announced their kind of like alternative backup KEM, because they had announced when they'd selected Kyber to become MLKEM that they were going to continue with like a fourth round because they wanted something that was not based on lattices. And they wanted to see if they could get something that was possibly smaller, possibly faster. And they selected KpqC as the upcoming fourth round selection. So when Kyber was announced, a lot of work started happening about trying to integrate these in a kind of provisional sense into protocols and how one would use them to take existing protocols and start making them in a quantum resilient fashion. And when MLKEM landed as the final FIPS 203 standard in August of last year, in August of 2024, it was like a shotgun went off, a starting gun went off, and everyone was off to the races. Previously, I was working in the IATF, and previously people were hesitant about getting PQ adoption and documents ready to go. They were a bit hesitant. And as soon as it became a US federal standard, people all over the world, not just in the United States, were like, oh, now we really actually have to get moving on PQ adoption, especially for protecting key agreement in the, kind of over a public channel. So Crystal's Kyber, the last version that was submitted to NIST, looks a little bit like this. I'm just going to do some overview because it'll be come in handy later. So for keygen, we generate a 32-byte random seed. We do the PKE keygen. As I kind of mentioned, you kind of take public key encryption that's usually randomized, and you de-randomize it, make it deterministic. And then you kind of wrap it up in this FO transform, Fujisaki Yakamoto transform, to take that deterministic KEM and encryption, public key encryption scheme, and make it into a KEM, a key encapsulation scheme. And so that's a little bit of what's going on here. We're prepping the keys for that. So we do the keygen for the PKE part. We take that 32-byte seed, stick it with the encryption key and decryption key for the public key encryption scheme, and the hash of the public key. And that is your whole decapsulation key for Kyber. And then you spit that out with the actual public key encryption key. And that seed, that 32-byte seed, is the FO transform rejection value, and that will be used in decapsulation here. So for Kyber v3 decapsulation, we parse out our keys. We are given a ciphertext that may be attacker controlled, and we parse out our secret decapsulation key. We do our public key decryption of that ciphertext and have a possible random message seed. We hash, or put through a KDF, that seed and the concatenation of the public key, the hash of the public key, the hash of the whole KEM public key in actuality. And we get the kind of proto, like the primordial shared secret. It's not the actual shared secret, but it'll be used later. And our prime, which is like the randomized seed, the secret randomness, not secret, the randomness that you use to give to that PKE, that public key encryption scheme, to take it from randomized to deterministic. That's that randomness. And then you recompute the ciphertext. and recomputing the ciphertext so you can compare it to what you should have been computing to encrypt under this public encapsulation key using this randomness, what you should have gotten if you were doing this honestly, and compare it to what the possible adversary handed to you. And if those cohere, if they agree, then you take the kind of primordial shared secret concatenated with the hash of the ciphertext, and then you put that through your KDF and return that as your actual KEM shared secret. And if those two ciphertexts do not agree, you take that FO transform rejection value, that 32-byte seed, concatenate that with the hash of the ciphertext, which is possibly attacker control, because this is a in CCA secure KEM, right? And return that. And that value is considered a nice thing to have from kind of a practical security perspective of integrating these new in the world of a world of protocols that expects things that are like Diffie-Hellman. You kind of always get a general real value with Diffie-Hellman, right? In the explicit rejection form of a KEM, you might output a symbol that's just like an error or panic if you implement this in a certain way in software. And that generally, you have to offload the decision of what to do with that value and what to do with that state to the programmer. And instead, the implicit rejection lets you have a value that is pseudo-random, that has some cryptographic value, and you can use it. It's not like you're outputting 0, but you will not agree with someone on the other side. So you're kind of in a slightly better way of running your protocol in a slightly better setting than just literally throwing an error, which can also be detected by a possible adversary. And one thing I just want to point out is that you can see very explicitly in this design of Kyber v3 that when we're deriving our shared secret, we are deriving it directly from the hash of the public key that we've encoded in our secret decapsulation key, and directly from the ciphertext that was handed to us as part of decapsulation. So when we're deriving our shared secret, we're very directly tying the ciphertext that we're using to compute it and the public key that the encapsulation key that we're using to compute it right in here. And it's very clear to see. And this can have very nice properties when you're trying to integrate it into protocols that I'll get into later. So as I mentioned, FIPS 203 landed, and this is taking Kyber and moving it into ML-KEM. And I have to remind people frequently, Kyber and ML-KEM are not interchangeable, interoperable cryptographic algorithms and cryptographic schemes. They have small differences. And one of the major differences here is that ciphertext that I mentioned, yes, we do our decryption, and yes, we do this. But if you notice, we no longer directly compute over the ciphertext when we're outputting our shared secret now. We're including that hash of the public key, the public encapsulation key, but we're no longer also hashing in the hash of the ciphertext anymore. We are kind of indirectly depending on it via the security properties of the public key encryption scheme. So that's a key difference. And one of the reasons that they did this is because, one, they were able to clean up the NCCA proof by not including the hash of the ciphertext into the computation. They had a tighter reduction, and they had much tighter bounds, and it was much nicer to have a much cleaner NCCA proof of what became ML-KEM, and that's the goal, right? That's how you prove security of a scheme like this. And also, if you're not, those ciphertexts are at least a kilobyte, 1.5 kilobytes or more, depending on your parameter set. And that's over a kilobyte of stuff you're not hashing in anymore, because the public keys are still, you cache the hash for the public key. In this case, you only do it once. You could in theory do it later, but you always had to hash in that ciphertext live when you're doing decapsulation. And in this design for ML-KEM, you aren't. So those seem to be and this is kind of discussed on the public KpqC form mailing list that is hosted by NIST, who runs the whole kind of competition. So that's where those two diverged. I'm talking a lot about this because these are the key players of how a lot of the stuff, a lot of the protocols are moving to a post-quantum position. Why aren't they just going directly to just replacing all their Diffie-Hellman with ML-Chem or something like it? Well, you know, for mitigating the attack scenario that we care about for key agreement and key establishment, that threat is the store now, decrypt later attack, or also known as harvest now, decrypt later, which is basically live now. Anyone can capture the public traffic going across a public connection, including TLS handshakes, secure encrypted messaging, handshakes and session setups and other things. And they can take all of that and store it. And when they have their sufficiently large, efficient quantum computer ready to go, they can rifle through their collection of handshakes and ciphertexts that have been protected by the computation of those handshakes, and just go to town and say, I think that looks juicy to me, and go decrypt it. So things that we're doing right now and the cryptography that we've deployed right now and using it to try and protect traffic and messaging is currently under threat, because you can just store it and decrypt it at a later date. So the people that want to mitigate this threat right now are more motivated to move quickly, even though these primitives are quite new. And for a lot of people, they don't understand them and they're a little bit unsure about them. And we've already seen a couple of non-trivial vulnerability classes that have just sort of sprung up in reference implementations and many other implementations of ML-Chem, especially the FIPS 203 standard that was like able to leak the shared secret in general because of the way that you were computing over a not fully public, not fully vulnerable secret leaking data and like compression and things like that. So it's not just we're worried that, I don't know, structured lattices are weak and we'll find like someone will just, crack it over the weekend on their laptop. Some people are worried about that because they just don't fundamentally understand this new, cryptographic assumptions and constructions. But others, it's just, this is new software, this is a new scheme, and this is a kind of newer class of implementation. And just new stuff has new risks that we haven't, bulletproofed it yet. And so there's a risk for that too. So to mitigate those kind of risks, moving to a hybrid post-quantum and classical construction in protocols and in primitives seems to be attractive to a lot of people. And there's a lot of other regulatory environments that actually are going to be requiring hybrid, including several European governments. So we're going to see a lot of different approaches to moving to a post-quantum resilient posture for a bunch of different reasons at the same time. And so I'm going to get into some of those. But I also want to make one point. We have a lot of experience now with elliptic curve cryptography, especially in production. We have these very small, very cheap, computationally speaking, primitives, and we know how to do them very well. Our current toolbox of PQ primitives are large. I mentioned 1.5, even larger sizes for public key, 1.5 kilobytes for public keys and ciphertexts. They're also computationally cheap. ML-Chem is quite fast. In fact, I think it's faster to compute decapsulations in keygen for ML-Chem than for X25519, for example. But they are large. If our PQ constructions were the same size as elliptic curves or smaller, I have a feeling we wouldn't be talking about hybrid, but they aren't. And so the fact that it's very cheap and computationally easy and cheap to staple these two things together, I think is a big factor into why people are like trying to hedge their bets. And they're just like, I'll just keep my small, cheap elliptic curves while I'm deploying this large and mostly computationally cheap lattice-based chem. So that's the world we're in. Okay, so let's look at some protocols. So TLS-13. TLS-13 was blessed with a beautiful protocol and key schedule that allowed us to do the simplest possible way of combining a post-quantum KEM and a classical key agreement like Diffie-Hellman, like elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, which is you do your ephemeral elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman with something like X25519. Oh, you could also use the P56 curve, which is quite popular as well. And you have your ephemeral keys that have an ephemeral elliptic curve point, and you have your KEM, and you have an ephemeral public encapsulation key that you generate. You send those public values as a client to a server. The server responds by generating its ephemeral elliptic curve point and computing its shared secret from the two of them together on its side. And then it takes that public encapsulation key, computes an encapsulation to it. The ciphertext sends that out and has its shared secret. So on the server side, and then the client gets the response and it's able to compute its complete its side of the handshake. Shared secret concatenated with shared secret, and then you just shove it back into the TLS13 key schedule exactly where you put just the plain old elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman shared secret, and you're kind of done. This is a lovely, efficient, most computationally efficient. There is no extra overhead or extra operations or extra anything being done here. This is possible because TLS13 is already hashing everything in the transcript of the whole handshake protocol into its key schedule, into all of these nested HKDFs, extracts, and derived secrets and all of that. It was already doing that for the client hello and that ephemeral key material, and for the server hello and its responsive key material and the ciphertext. All of that is getting hashed in automatically anyway. So secretly, TLS13 is hashing in, quote, everything. It's hashing in the two shared secrets from the traditional elliptic curve side, from TLS13. It's lovely. This is being deployed right now. It's been integrated into Google Chrome, and it's on by default across Chrome on all devices, I think. It wasn't on Android for a little bit because of performance issues, and then those resolved and they were able to turn them on. It's been deployed by Cloudflare. It's being integrated by Apple it's how you're developing apps with CryptoKit. It's being deployed by AWS in its KMS system. It's getting deployed all over the place. This is one of the fastest moving updates of moving to a post-quantum posture in a protocol that I am aware of. It's also now the default most prioritized key agreement in OpenSSL in its latest version. So speaking of Apple updated iMessage, and they updated it in a major update that they called KpqC. And this was their major update to make iMessage quantum resilient, but also it included a lot of updates to the messaging protocol in general that were kind of well overdue. And this included ratcheting. So this message also included better forwards and post-compromise security in your encrypted iMessage chats than before. But the important thing I wanted to note here is how it computes how it does its KDF over its session setup information. So when you're trying to set up, for those who might be familiar with Signal, similar to the long existing versions of Signal, iMessage KpqC has these long-lived identity keys, which are kind of identified here, ID, EC, VK, and things like that for the sender and the receiver. We also include like ID, like numbers, labels, and a label for what this computation is going to be in its key schedule. It also includes these kind of pre-key things. So when you want to create a new encrypted chat with an async chat with someone who might not be online, what you want to do is you have the long-lived identity keys that those are like the root of your identity. But you also want to have the ephemeral part, the kind of like freshly ephemeral part to start up the new encrypted session with. But if your partner is not always online, what do you do? Well, what you do is you pre-compute the ephemeral things and you sign them with your authentication key, which is usually like a permutation of your ID key. and you cache them up on the server. So you trust the server to just be an honest fetcher and broker of that sort of information. And so you pre-cache these pre-keys on the server. So for Apple's update to iMessage, they had already, I actually don't remember if they already had the elliptic curve pre-keys, but you have these elliptic curve pre-keys for the sender and the receiver. And now you have these post-quantum pre-keys over here for the receiver. And then the person who is sending the message fetches down the post-quantum encapsulation key pre-key, and then they encapsulate to it. So when you're computing the whole new session setup, you have the receiver's pre-key, and you have the ciphertext that the sender computes for encapsulating to them. This is the kind of public transcript of this session getting smushed down into this like additional information that's going to get stuck into the KDF. And then we call this KDF. And so we have the kind of public data, and that goes into pi s down here. And we've got the elliptic curve shared secret and the post-quantum shared secret that spat out of that. And if you look in here, this is an interesting variant of how to do a nice KDF. This is like a split key KDF version with multiple HKDF extracts, and then your expand. But I think I've already gave it away, but you can kind of see iMessage PQ3 also just hashes in everything. So we've got all the public stuff, and we've got the shared secrets, and we go through our trusted KDF that has, the way we want to formulate our KDF. But everything public to set up the session that everyone can see that's used to compute the shared secret goes into the KDF. Okay, we talked about Signal. Now let's get into Signal. So Signal also went to update to a post-quantum hybrid update. This included a very similar thing to what I mentioned with iMessage, where the ID keys that they have, they're a slightly different variety than the iMessage ones, but those are still just elliptic curve based, but they updated their existing elliptic curve pre-keys with these new Kyber based, or at least in the first version, they're Kyber post-quantum pre-keys as well. And both sides have them, of course. So when we're doing a session setup, we have our pre-signed pre-keys up on the server. We do the triple Diffie-Hellman. So we have a Diffie-Hellman 1, 2, 3. Some of them involve the ephemeral key, the signed pre-key, and the ID key, and vice versa. And then we do like the ephemeral pre-key and the ephemeral pre-key, and that's the third Diffie-Hellman. And then we have our KEM encapsulation. So that's our ciphertext and our shared secret, and we include the shared secret. And I'll point out here, the KDF is just shared secret, concatenated with shared secret, concatenated with shared secret, concatenated with the post-quantum shared secret. And then we have our additional data, which is concatenating the sender ID public key and the receiver ID public key. And that's it. And those are both elliptic curve based. And that is included as the additional data for encrypting under, authenticated encryption with additional data cipher. So I won't belay the lead. Signal's first version of its post-quantum update just hashed in the shared secrets and was lacking a lot of the public context of the protocol from actually getting tied in to the KDF. And it kind of makes sense because this is one of those tension points of when you're making updates to an existing protocol where you have a lot of robust security proofs about existing things that you care about, and you don't want to diverge too much. But they're including a new primitive with different security properties than Diffie-Hellman, and Diffie-Hellman kind of included some other stuff that a straight up KEM, when you're just relying on in-CCA as the thing that you need from it, did not. So this opened up this first version of Signal KpqC to re-encapsulation attacks. And just to go in here, basically, if an adversary compromised one of those post-quantum pre-key pairs, one of them, and got access to the secret key and was able to kind of man in the middle here, they're able to decapsulate that shared secret from one, KEM ciphertext, and then re-encapsulate it under new people to the other party's public key or whatever, so that say in this example we have Alex thinks that he's computing a new session with Blake, but he's actually computing the same session shared secret with this adversary Charlie in the middle. And so we have this attack on session independence, and we have this like this impersonation attack, and that this is a fundamental protocol violation that we didn't think was happening. This is completely allowed and valid under NCCA. This is like totally in scope of an NCCA adversary. The first version of this protocol update from Signal, they wrote down in the specification and have a NCCA KEM, blah, 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 blah. And it just turns out that that is not enough to protect against this kind of attack. The compromise of a single post-quantum public key, in fact, enables an attacker to compromise all future KEM shared secret of the responder, even after the responder deletes their compromised post-quantum public key, because you were able to get one of them and you're able to re-encapsulate it under another one. Yeah, so it basically implies that there is more that we need to care about our KEMs that we're slotting into protocols, such as protocols that were designed specifically around Diffie-Hellman, and these sort of kind of implied guarantees that we get from Diffie-Hellman that we don't get from a purely NCCA KEM. So the reason we care about this is because not every protocol like TLS-1.3 or post-quantum iMessage can just hash everything into their key schedule or into their protocol KDF. For one, some of those protocols just might not be in the kind of environment that can afford that, or they might not be in a kind of a compute device environment that can afford that. I've been trying to look at these IoT protocols that can't afford a lot of that stuff. But also, we want to be able to use these KEMs in a way that, like, we don't have to hash everything in all the time to wield them. We want to know more about them so that we can decide what we need to include, as opposed to including everything just because that's the only way to cover your butt. Because some of these KEMs are, again, quite large, like kilobytes of data that needs to be included into these key schedules. And that's not including some of the much larger one, which are multiple kilobytes or even larger. So this is where we kind of get into more notions beyond NCCA for KEMs, these binding properties that came out. This is sort of kind of like a spurring paper, not the only paper, from Kramer's, Dax, and Migger about the binding properties of KEMs. And so really quickly, this is kind of the general security game of a lot of the binding properties we care about, which is these are collision resistant properties. And the ones that we care the most about is basically, I'm going fast because I don't want to run out of time. When we have a shared secret, is it hard to find a collision between ciphertexts, public encapsulation keys, or combinations of those things to result in the same value of a shared secret? And we find that those are kind of the most salient for when we're integrating KEMs into higher level protocols. There's like a whole zoo of other kinds of combinations of these binding properties. And one of the things that we have 3 different general attacker models that we're trying to protect against. An honest adversary who doesn't have access, he just sees everything public and he acts normally. A leak adversary that can have access to honestly generated key material, or a malicious adversary that has access to honestly generated key material and can manipulate key material, including secret key material. And basically, these properties can also hold independent of NCCA. So like you might have a KEM construction that has a good binding property, but you might have a bug in your implementation, and your NCCA-ness may break down. And we've seen that. I might have been in KpqC that got fixed. Actually, I'm not sure about that. I think it was the reference implementation of the submission, and it got fixed. But this can hold up even independent of that. So it's kind of like a nice layer that you can have independent of NCCA. It looks like a leak bind KpK KEM slotted in where the NCCA KEM is into the first version of Signal's PQXCH, protects against that key encapsulation attack and that session independence falling down. So the specification only specified an NCCA KEM, but in their implementation, they used Kyber, and they used Kyber v3. And then I think they've queued up MLChem now, and I don't remember if they've actually deployed it with MLChem or not. And so the analysis by Crispin of Signal's PQXDH seems to show that a variant of this collision resistance does in fact protect against this kind of attack. So, and I'll skip through this because I'm running out of time. So when you have Kyber, though, that's one thing. And because that is hashing in its ciphertext, MLChem doesn't hash in ciphertext. Does this have any implications? So I'm going to go quickly through MLChem's binding properties. Because it directly hashes in that public key, or the hash of the public key that should be controlled by the decapsulator. It has strong binding properties on the public key. We have to revisit this in terms of seeds, but it's not directly binding the ciphertext. We do have a proof that we have ciphertext collision resistance, especially against a leak adversary. And we have another property that I'll get to later that's pre-image resistance, or second pre-image resistance for the ciphertext, which comes in very handy. Putting all these things together, it does seem like MLChem slotted into that first version of Signal PQC, PQXEX, prevents that re-encapsulation attack. But what they actually did and what was recommended by the reviewers is include that post-quantum public key into the additional data. Then you don't have to worry about all these extra properties and stuff like that. It's not quite hashing everything in the way what we saw on TLS 1.3 and PQ iMessage, but it closes that attack vector. But this is like a lot of work just to and like this does hold for these particular chems, Kyber and MLChem. Classic McLeese does not meet this threshold for these the specific variants of collision resistance for these binding properties to slot into that part, and it's unclear for Bike and A2C. I think there's updated analysis to answer that question, but I wasn't able to confirm it. This is a lot of work to try to figure out how to integrate these chems into your existing protocol, because you can't just rely on the NCCA-ness. What else can we do? So, okay, that's at the protocol level and trying to get something nice for your protocol, but we can also just shove all this decision-making into the primitive itself and make a hybrid chem. So, yes, it's an NCCA chem that slots into a place where a chem is already expected. That includes protocols like hybrid public key encryption, different kind of hybrid, that's being used directly in the new encrypted client hello update in TLS 1.3 that's getting deployed and is becoming an RFC any day now. It's a key dependency in the new messaging layer security protocol. It abstracts some of this decision-making and thinking about it away a bit, but you might lose a little bit of the efficiency and might be doing extra work than if you had like a finely tuned custom protocol like you can kind of get with TLS 1.3 or some of the others. So I wanted to talk about X-Wing. X-Wing is an example of one of these hybrid chems. It's a concrete construction based on a generic framework that we laid out in the paper, and it's based on MLChem 768 and X25519. And the thing I want to point out here is that we have kind of similar to, our prior constructions. We have our post-quantum shared secret concatenated with a label, and our elliptic curve shared secret, and the elliptic curve kind of ephemeral public key, and the elliptic curve long-term public key. And we shove all that through our KDF, which is SHA-356. And we're able to do that because we were able to show kind of this other flavor of binding property. Specifically, it's this ciphertext second pre-image resistance. So the binding properties I talked about were collision resistance. This ciphertext second pre-image resistant was sufficient to show that if we have a chem with that property, we can prove NCCA-ness in the standard model. And we're able to prove NCCA-ness in the random oracle model based on the properties of the KDF as a random oracle and the strength of the elliptic curve group. So that if the post-quantum bit just completely falls apart, we still believe in the security of elliptic curves, we still have a strong NCCA chem on that side. It does look at this allowed us to exclude the large ciphertext, kind of what we saw earlier, but also the large public key from hashing this in to make things a lot more efficient. Similar work that's happening out there is influenced by X-Wing, but also this is the work in the IETF and the Crypto Forum Research Group. This includes the generic framework that supports X-Wing, but also this sort of hash everything in variant. It includes all the traditional, the post-quantum, and all of the public stuff in one hash, hybrid chem, and also an optimization of that design, but with you pre-hashing the public encapsulation keys, which can be large. So you can do that hash once and cache that information, which is an optimization. That is becoming adopted in other IETF documents. We're also seeing another composite chem design coming from NIST. It's very similar to that GHP style, and we're trying to align them on purpose, and other stuff in the IETF trying to align on these composite chems, especially when using them in a certificate, because that might also be a way to authenticate using chems and using hybrid chems. So one nice thing about X-Wing is that's showing a lot of popular adoption. It's being adopted and rolled out by Apple for its latest version of CryptoKit. It's being used in KpqE. It's been implemented in Boring SSL from Google, and we think that they are using it for their deployment of encrypted client hello. And it's being supported in MLS in the IETF. Several of those other hybrid chems from CF4G are also getting supported in MLS. General HPK use, if you want to use it, there's other encryption schemes in the IETF that use that. And we've seen a lot of interest from designers who are trying to integrate or move to post-quantum in sort of HSM designs and open compute designs. So this is kind of like a survey of like the various ways that people are trying to move into a hybrid post-quantum posture. We've got all these protocol updates that are kind of bespoke, but kind of hard to do really well. And now we've got these hybrid chems that people are trying to slot in different protocols in different ways. It might be slightly less efficient, but they have a lot less to think about if they kind of, people do all the work for them, wrap it up in a hybrid chem. And if they're fine with that, they can just deploy that really nicely if that works for them. There's going to be multiple ways that we can go hybrid, both in the component algorithms that we're going to deploy, where in the stack that you're actually going to integrate it, and even amongst the different places in the stack, there's multiple ways to do it, like these different designs for hybrid chems. And for a long time in the future, I think it's going to be a long, long time until when we are in a fully post-quantum future with no traditional broken, vulnerable to Shor's algorithm stuff. For a long time. And that's not even looking at the authentication piece with signatures and things like that. There's going to be a lot of different stuff that's hybrid post-quantum all over the place for a long time. If you think this is confusing and a little bit messy, talk to your local cryptographer about whether going directly to PQ is the right solution for you, and maybe you can avoid some of that mess. Thank you. I'm open to questions.
Thank you for your invaluable talk. Do you have any questions? I have a question. So this question might not directly relevant to your talk, but I saw some Rust code in your slide, for example, Rust TLS. So I do you envision the adoption of Rust language while implementing some cryptographic protocols or primitives would be accelerated? And also, what are the implications of implementing some cryptographic encryption protocols or primitives using Rust beyond the memory safety guaranteed by the Rust itself?
Sure. I'm a big fan of Rust. I've implemented MLChem in Rust and some other post-quantum schemes. I'm a big fan because beyond the memory safety, which is very nice for complex protocols like, say, TLS or some of these other complicated protocols, the safety that gives you, the strong typing and low cost abstraction that Rust gives you is very, very nice for abstracting out your types, like your different key materials, your different kinds of ciphertext for KEMs, so that it is practically impossible for when you're using an implementation that's abstracted in such a way to confuse the public ciphertext that got handed to you by an adversary and the recomputed ciphertext that you have done yourself that may be influenced by attacker control data and needs to be treated in a different way by computing over it than you would from the fully public one. This is directly related to KpqC, and I've updated my own code to specifically be like, you cannot compute over this in a secret dependent way, which would result in side channels. And for this ciphertext, you can. This is a thing that is just cheap and easy to do at a performance level and like a software engineering level in Rust that you kind of learn the hard way and you have to kind of eat the cost depending on another programming language. I think that's great, and I really love using Rust for cryptography because of the capabilities like that, far beyond the memory safety.
Oh, I see.
So
another question, please.
Yes, this is Nari. I have two questions. First, I think there can be similar concerns in the context of hybrid signatures. Do you think the concept of C2PRI used in KEM combiners, maybe can it be meaningfully extended to signature schemes as well? Or would you argue that a completely different approach is needed for signatures?
Signatures are kind of tough because the way you integrate them into your protocol is like a binary. One of the nice things that's allowed people to move quickly with adoption of key establishment of these KEMs into protocols is like, if you compute the wrong, especially these implicit rejection KEMs, is if you compute the wrong thing or you get the rejection value out of it, the parties don't agree to a shared secret and they just cannot compute, and you can detect it. Signatures are, did you validate it and did it validate or not? It's one, you have to do it and just did it validate or not. And then to continue your large protocol, you just have to stop. And like, it does not flow its value into the rest of the protocol. And there's some nice work being done about, I don't have the name off the top of my head, of like trying to output values beyond just it verified or not, that you can use to integrate it into your key schedule to change the value of what you agree on to detect this sort of thing. if we had those sort of signature or authentication primitive constructions, I would be looking closely at binding properties or, second pre-image resistant properties. But because they have this fundamentally different way that you work with the primitive, they don't quite compute. There's a document in the IETF that I'm a co-author on that's literally how you do hybrid signatures. And there's a spectrum of separability that seems to be a key property about how to do hybrid signatures, and the spectrum from it's very easy to strip off one of the component signatures to you blow up the signature scheme and wrap it up with post-quantum and traditional assumptions and wrap it all up so it's a very tightly bound signature scheme and practically as strongly non-separable. So because of the way that signatures are and that we're used to using them, and I have a feeling that's not going away anytime soon, it's less collision resistance or pre-image resistance and more these separability properties. And those are they're just a little bit squishier than here is the game for binding or ciphertext second pre-image resistance. So I welcome more research on that. It may be difficult.
Thank you for your answer. My second question is just my personal curiosity about the hybrid KEM. I wonder why you named it as X-Wing. Maybe any one of your the co-authors is Star Wars mania. I don't know. So
yes, I'm pretty sure I can attribute this to one of the co-authors, Peter Schwabe. He has names. He is also a co-author of Kyber and the related signature scheme dilithium. Those are also big Star Wars things. I'm pretty sure he was the one that came up with the name X-Wing. And I think if you notice in the diagram, the label is kind of this / dot, whatever. If you line that up, it's like ASCII art for an actual X-Wing starfighter. We've got a bunch of Star Wars nerds in our group.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, thank you for your great talk, and please give a round of applause for our speaker again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.